In this lesson, we're going to learn how to animate a bouncing ball. All right, so the first thing we need to do is create like a floor, and it's not for any kind of physics simulation. We're just going to create it for a visual cue. So let's go to create and go to polygon primitives, and let's do a plane. And we can just hit the scale, which is R, and just scale this thing up. Mine's scaled up to like 45 units or 45 times the original scale, I should say, not units. Cool, so now let's create a sphere. So let's go create polygon primitives and sphere, and it creates it in the middle there. And we could just grab the move tool, which is W, and just kind of raise it up. And I'm going to push mine over in the X direction. And you could go ahead and do that too, just so we're all animating in the same direction. So mine is roughly translated, 8.3 units up in Y, and then negative 17 units or negative 18 units over in X. All right, so let's look at our time slider first thing. Down at the bottom, we have this. If you click on it and drag, there's this like time slider. It's almost like a playback slider, like on any like video editing software. We have some frame ranges at the bottom. So we have these inner ranges, which we could kind of click and drag this thing, and it changes this inner range. So we could kind of zoom in on just like a small range of frames if we wanted to. Or we could just kind of drag this out and see the whole range over here. So mine's going from 1 to 200. So if yours is something different, that's fine. You can just type in, instead of maybe yours is 100. Just go ahead and highlight this first number in this right-hand area here and type in 200, just so we're all working with the same thing. And let's go to frame 1. And so the way this works is if you're on a frame in your time slider and you have an object selected in your viewport, and you tap the S for Sam key, if I tap that, it makes a little red tick down here on the timeline, and our channel box turns red to indicate that we're animating on these translate, rotate, scale, and visibility channels. So now if I go to, let's say, frame, let's go, well, before we do that, let's click on some preferences first. So let's make sure we're all animating on the same frames per second. So what I'm going to do is click on the bottom right corner. There's this gear over the little orange guy. You click that, and then you want to scroll down to where it says time slider and click that. And I'm at 24 frames per second, and that's what film is. So let's go ahead and leave it at that. And then down underneath playback, you want this option, instead of play every frame, which will play back way too fast, you want to play 24 frames per second. So let's click 24 FPS and then a little X1, and then let's hit save. Cool. So now let's go to the frame. So let's say we want the ball to like drop from here and like bounce, and then bounce a little bit as it's going forward. So maybe like at the 1 second mark, we're going to get a bounce. So that'll be frame 24. So I'm going to click and drag my slider to frame 24. So here's the order of operations that we do this. We move the time slider, then we move our ball. I'm going to move it over a little bit and then move it down so it's just prior to it intersecting the ground. And I'm going to hit S again. So again, the order of operations is move your time slider, move your object, and then hit S. Now, if you mess up that order of operations, let's say you move your sphere first and then move your time slider, it snaps back to the last keyframe. That's why you move your time slider first. So let's go to maybe 2 seconds in. So that would be frame 48. I'll get it there. and then move your sphere, over and up, I would say, and hit S. So again, we're going to move our time slider again. So let's go to frame 72. So move the time slider. Now I'm going to move it over and down till it, just before it intersects with the ground. Hit S. And let's do a few more of these. We don't have to do a ton of them, but we get the basic idea here. So then we're going to go to 96. So we move the time slider. Now we're going to move this up and over. Hit S, and maybe let's do one more. So then we're going to go to 120. And we'll go over and down right about there and hit S. So now if we, let's hit the playback button. So hit play. And I guess we don't need these extra frames. We could chop that off there. So we have this very floaty looking ball moving across our plane there. So let's trim down these frames. So we could just drag this little thing here. If I click on this and drag it, we could drag it down to like right where our last keyframe is, like maybe 120. We could actually just type in 120 there. Let's do 121 since I want to be able to see that last keyframe. Cool, so now if I hit play, it'll just loop and there won't be that dead spot at the end. All right, cool, we got some basic stuff. We got some movement, but it looks horrible. It doesn't look like a bouncing ball at all. So let's just save this though. Let's do File, Save Scene As, and I'm gonna make a week 7 folder. And just throw it in there. Bouncing ball. All right, cool. So we got that saved in case mine crashes. Next thing we need to do is edit how this thing, so it's looking really floaty. And we need to make it so like it hangs kind of in the air, then it has like a fast acceleration to the ground, then a sharp bounce, and then it hangs in the air, and then a bounce, and then it hangs and bounces and hangs. So the way we do that is we gotta edit the way Maya interpolates between these positions, the keyframes. So if we go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, it brings up this window and nothing's in it yet, but if we select our sphere, now we can see our animation curve. So we have our time slider here, and we have our values. So let's look at Translate Y, for instance. So I'm going to click on Translate Y, which is this green one right here. Now this is this movement in the Y axis, which is up and down over time. So we're starting out up here, then we come down here, but you can see it's very smooth in these curves. So the way we need to fix that is we need to select all these bottom curves where it hits the ground. This is 0, this is ground level, and this is like the bounce level up here. So let's draw a box around all these bottom ones. So we're selecting these bottom keyframes. And then we're going to hit this break tangent button up here, because real quick, just to show you what I'm talking about, if I select one, we get these little Bezier handles. You should be able to click and move these. There we go. And you can see how even if I move this, it's still kind of a smooth curve there. Let me just undo that. So if I get all 3, and then if I break the tangents, so if I hit this little, it looks like the letter V right here. If I break those, we could grab handles and move them up without the other handle being affected. So we could then do this. If you move it too far, the curve shoots off in space. So you just want to make them sharp, but not too sharp. Cool, and then I'll grab this one and, oops, sometimes it's hard to get those handles. And then like that. So now let's play back and see the effect that we have. So I'm going to we can just close that. Hit play. So already it makes a world of difference to change those animation curves. So that's called in and out. You hear these terms in animation like ease in, ease out. So before we had ease in, fast out. I'm sorry, let me rephrase. We had ease in, we had an ease out, and then we had an ease in, and then an ease out. So everything was very easy and smooth. And what we did was we have an easy out from that top position, but then we have a fast in and a fast out on that bounce. And then we have an ease in at the top, so we get this slow kind of hang and an ease out from that position. Then we have a fast in and a fast out on that bounce, and then same on the last hang, and then a fast in on that last bounce. So let's go ahead and save, so Control S. So the next thing we want to do is maybe clean up the speed at which it's kind of moving across the board there, or the ground plane. So again, let's go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, bring that back up. So let's look at the Translate X, because we're moving along the Translate X, moving forward, or to the side, I guess you'd call it. So let's click on Translate X. So we kind of have this ease out, and then these are pretty evenly spaced. It's pretty linear. We actually don't need these middle keyframes, so I could just draw a box and select these middle 4 frames, delete them. Now we get this big S curve, which we don't want. We just want continuous motion. So let's grab this curve. If I just draw like a box around it, it turns white. And let's change it to linear. So not flat, let's do linear. So this is like this right angle, not right angle, like a 45-degree angle line here. Click that, and then it changes this to be linear. So now if we play back, there's less hiccups in that kind of X movement. Now the last thing we want to do is get some squash and stretch on this guy. So let's go to frame 1, and while the ball's up in the air, we want it to be stretched. So I'm going to grab my scale tool and hit R, and I just want to scale it in just the Y direction, just a little bit. I don't want to go crazy with it, but something like this. And then we don't want to key everything, because we just did all that work on changing those animation curves. We don't want Maya to then put them back to that sine wave kind of curve. So we just want to do scale Y. So let's click on scale Y here in the channel box. You click on the word scale Y, and then right click, and then do key selected. So it's keying just that one attribute that we changed. Let's go to frame 24, and then we could squish it down. We could like scale it like this, and then again right click on scale Y and do key selected. Go to frame 48, we'll stretch it up a little bit. I'm just eyeballing it. Right click on scale Y, key selected. Scale this down. Key selected. Then go next keyframe, we'll scale it up. Key selected, and then finally the last one at 120, we'll squish it down. And we'll do key selected. So now if I play this back, it's it looks even weirder now because it's kind of squashing before it hits the ground. So let's fix that. So let's press stop and let's go to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And this time we're going to look at scale Y. So click scale Y, then we got this oscillation like we had before. But what we want to happen is we want the scale to be the same until it hits the ground, because the squash wouldn't happen until it hits like a collision object, right? So we want this to be pretty continuous until it hits that ground, and then eventually stretch back out again. So essentially what we want is something that looks like, let me grab my little grease pencil tool. So instead of what we have now, which is, this kind of sine wave on the scale, what we really want, let me get rid of that, is something that looks like this. You get the idea. So the scale, it's stretched until it hits the ground, then it squashes, then it expands back to that stretched, and then squashes immediately when it hits the ground and expands back, basically like that. All right, so let's do that. So let's select our sphere, and then again grab your graph editor and click on scale Y. And then for these top keys, let's just draw a box around the top ones. What we want to do is do, I think it's flat or step tangents, that's what it is. So there's this the little one that looks like a stair step. You want to click that one. So by already we're starting to get what we want. So we get this continuous scale state, and then when it hits the ground, it just squashes. So now let's take a look and see what result we get from that. It's pretty cool. It's pretty close. So then let's, the last thing we want to do is maybe offset these keyframes just a little bit. We want there to be a little bit of a delay from when it hits the ground to when it squashes, because you got to think, maybe it takes 2 or 3 frames for it to get that squash after it hits the ground. So what I'm going to do is select all these keyframes on scale Y, like the whole thing, not just the top or the bottom ones. And then I want to grab the move tool, which is W, after I selected that inside my graph editor. And then we can move these to the side. Now the dangers of just clicking, let me undo that. Let me zoom in. Oops. Dangers of just moving these. So you have to select them, then hit W, which is the move tool, and then use your middle mouse button to move them. But what can happen is you can move it up, down, and left and right. So I want to just move left and right. So I just want to undo this. Then if you hold down Shift, then middle mouse click, and then start to go left and right, it prevents you from going up and down. So I just want to kind of, so we're starting there. So I want to move over like 1, 2, 3. It's snapping to the frames, maybe like 3 frames over. And so you can see this last frame is kind of off the edge, and that's fine. So now let's play it back and see what we have. I think that's maybe a little too much of an offset, so let's go back to the graph editor, so Windows, animation editors, graph editor. And if you have multiple monitors, this is great because you don't have to keep closing windows and stuff. So if you select your sphere, go to scale Y, maybe select all these keyframes, again hold down Shift, middle mouse drag to the left, and then maybe 1 frame offset from the beginning is enough. As you can see down here, we have frames on frame 1, and then now we have a frame on frame 2 because we just offset our scale keys 1 frame over. So let's minimize that, and let's watch the animation. All right, and that's kind of like the basics of creating an animation, setting some keyframes, editing animation curves, and then working with offsets by offsetting an animation to get a delayed effect. So that's the basics of animation. The next lesson we'll go into a walk cycle. All right, guys, thanks a lot.